So welcome back again after the lunch break. I'm happy and I'm sure that you all had, some good discussions, what happened in the morning, also, really giving a feedback about those 9 days of seminar. It all comes together in this forum, and that's exactly what we want to achieve, to really have this dialogue between the young change makers, and I'm so happy that Zach is here on stage with me today, and also all the excellencies and distinguished guests we have today. So thank you for coming back for the last 2.5 hours or so. So bear with us, because not only a great panel number 3 will come up just now, but also another 2 conversations later on. So before handing over the floor to a distinguished panel, Zach, I heard we're going to see a video where one of your colleagues is involved.
That is true. We have another video interview, like the one that we had before, made by Riccardo Priolio and Naima Kirkekyo. And it's an interview with actually someone that I think I have a lot of things in common with. We're both young change makers. We both went to the same university. And I hope I will be a professor assistant like her at some point. It will be an interview with Suja Sawafta. And she studied Oriental Studies at Oxford. And now she's an assistant professor in French at the university, in Arabic and French at the University of Miami. So let's see the video.
It upsets me that this is still a conversation in 2022. I think we have all of the resources. We have technology, we have food delivery systems, we have drones. Instead of dropping bombs, why aren't we dropping food? So there's so many creative solutions. And yet, I think the problem is that our global community is focused on extraction and consumption and overproducing. My name is Suja Sawafta. I'm 34 years old, and I'm currently a professor of Arabic literature at the University of Miami. Aside from my academic career, I've decided to focus my social activism and endeavors on combating food insecurity. I've been privileged enough to never have been personally food insecure, but I grew up with the awareness of my Palestinian community's struggle in the territories, in the occupied territories. And there's a saying in Palestine that you never go to sleep if your neighbor is hungry. And to me, that really taught me the basis of my social commitment and my political commitments. I also grew up in the United States. And there are many communities in that environment that don't have food security, that are unable to access healthy food, nutritious food. They live in food deserts. And so I've seen the spectrum of what food insecurity can mean, whether it's locally, individually, globally. If we're to understand the system, we have to learn from the people who are producing our food. What are some of the challenges they are facing on the ground? How are they having to act? What tools do they need? And once we can help with the sourcing of this, then once the crop is there, you can talk about how to kind of democratize access to that food. So it's not just about the actual product. It's not just about the crop. In my opinion, it's from root to plant, from root to fruit. But it requires being culturally sensitive and aware of the different intricacies of the context you're speaking about. We need to do our individual part, but we also need to encourage our governments and our corporations and the people in charge of the supply chain to stop putting profit over people. My message to the speakers at the forum is to focus our next initiatives of cooperation on the collective good. So understanding that food security and climate action go hand in hand, that economic development and alleviating poverty, having access, being food secure is part of solving that problem as well. If people are nourished, they're in a position to be innovative. If they're malnourished, they're just focused on the basic instincts of survival. So I really think that we can no longer divorce both the issue of food insecurity and climate change from politics, from social work, and it needs to be part and parcel of the social capacity.
So very meaningful contribution of this young change maker, and you see how hardworking they've been during these seminars, talking about such important fundamental issues as food insecurity. So here it comes all together in the next panel that Zach, you can introduce.
From roots to fruits, and from farm to fork. I just made that up. So we have our third panel now on food insecurity and climate change and its effect on the MEM region. And who can chair this? No one can chair this better than His Excellency Paio Wennubst, the chairman of this meeting and the ambassador of the Permanent Mission of Switzerland to the United Nations, also someone that we know very well at the MEM Summer Summit. Thank you very much, and please join us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for welcoming on stage Pio Wennubst. And then as a first guest, we have Eugenio Dacrema, Early Warning Economic Risk Analyst of the World Food Programme in Italy. Benvenuto e grazie per questa cosa. Then we have a young changemaker, Sebahat Derin Atiskan. Welcome. Another colleague, Alaa Alzaghoul. Very warm welcome. And as a third grande finale of the Changemakers, Tamara Kleibo. Unfortunately, I have to excuse Hanan Said from Lebanon. She's the lead specialist of the Human Development and Social Protection of the World Bank in MENA region. You all know how difficult times Lebanon is just going through, so it wasn't possible to even get an online connection. So obviously we thank her for, would have been great to have her at least online, but you see that we've got a wonderful and distinguished panel. Looking forward to listening to all of you. Please.
Thank you for being here. Let's see, we've got 1 hour. 1 hour can be very long, but can be very short as well. Therefore, and since I'm tendentially, who knows me well, I'm tendentially a bit talkative. Instead of making a big introduction, I go directly in the interaction with our guests, if you don't mind. Anyway, you had already a glimpse of some of the issues we might be discussing with the video that you just saw, because there was some of the thought and discussion were already happening at that time. Eugenio, you basically, in your current position, you have to analyze risk, early warning risks, and so on. And at the beginning, when we were still talking about food insecurity in the region, we were not sure whether this was so really the case, or whether this was kind of usual business as usual, that sometimes you have hiccups in the chain that make access to food, nutritious food, available for everyone. What is your first analysis on that?
Well, in the MENA region, you have some very long pre-existing crises, pre-existing COVID, pre-existing current war crisis in Ukraine and so on. I would say three of them particularly dramatic, also in our scale, which is a scale of drama very much. The first one is Yemen, which for a long time had what we call a famine-like situation in some region, which means that the people were concretely at risk of starving. Not in all of Yemen. You have food insecurity for more than half of the population, but in some regions people were literally dying of hunger. You have Syria, where you have 12 million of food insecure out of a population of a bit more than 20 million, so more than half. And then you have Lebanon, which is, population-wise, is not as big as the other two, but still, in relative terms, is quite impressive because you have more than 2 million food insecure of our population. if you count also the refugees of almost 5 million. So you have these three macro cases that have been there for a long time. And obviously, the last developments, COVID first, and also the recent spike in food and energy prices made things obviously more difficult for these countries. Then we have other situations we are aware of, although we don't have data. You know, food security data are not easy to collect, so we don't have data about every country in the world. But we can, sometimes when we have an impression that a country is going through difficult times in food insecurity, we try to understand it. We are developing, for example, for Tunisia, we are thinking about having a food security data collection in the next future. Why? Because there are a few countries in the region, and I'm thinking Tunisia is probably the biggest case, but I'm thinking also about Egypt, where they have been going through a period of heavy food inflation rise over the last year especially, and where we think this food inflation has been affecting the well-being of a lot of people. In particular, Egypt is going through macroeconomic problems, still not so chronic as Tunisia. In Tunisia, we also have the problem that we are seeing not only price going up, also poverty going up. So people not only need more money to buy food, but also they have less money to do so. And I think these are two cases where we probably have to go to work on in the next future.
Yeah, may I just briefly stay with you and ask you just a question, because we've been wondering this for ages. All those have been working in the food security, put it in this way. Maybe it's not the problem that the fact that basically maybe we treated for too long food as just as a commodity. You produce it somewhere in the world where you have a kind of a comparative advantage or perceived comparative advantage, you ship it and you trade it. We had already a lot of hiccups, and then the question is, can we continue like this? Or should we start treating food less of a commodity and something that is more linked towards a public good?
Okay, well, that's something that goes back far in time in terms of how structurally many developing economies has been developing in the last decades. And I mean, it can be a surprise, but not so much so. The fact that actually this concept, the fact that food commodities are not just simple commodities, but they have a public value, and also a public risk. Since I'm a risk analyst, they have a public risk attached, because if people don't have a scarcity of cars, they can be unhappy, but they don't get so angry with the governments. But if they don't have food, yeah, that's a problem. Also politically, not just for public health and food security. And I think, I mean, this is something that was very clear, actually is very clear in advanced economies. I think the European Union spends a lot of money in its common budget. Actually, the common budget has been there for a long time, mainly for paying for a common agricultural policy, which has been subsidizing a lot of agricultural production in the Union. The same does the US, and while it's not true that every developing country doesn't have that as a policy, but I think in the Middle East, in particular, you had a long time of neglecting the agricultural sector in favor of other sectors that were also in the public narrative were supposed to be where the real development happens, especially the service sector, technology sectors, and so on. I mean, there are a couple of countries I know pretty well from my personal experience. One is Syria, that was actually one of the few countries in the region before, or at least before the conflict, where you had, there was a net exporter, but over the previous decades had seen its production going down and down because most of public investment was going more into urban areas and other kind of economic development. Or Lebanon that had a quite good agricultural sector before the civil war, but the economic, also the industrial sector, and the economic model that was applied after the civil war, and that led also to the current financial collapse, completely neglected the potential that is quite good for Lebanon, for example, in the agricultural sector. I think in general there is a need to rethink the meaning of food and the importance it has in terms of social stability, public goods, and so on, and keeping in mind though that it's a region that has to keep always pretty good in mind that it's structurally dependent on imports, because for demographic reasons, for water scarcity reasons. Yeah.
Okay, I'm getting there to a point there. So when we are having this kind of problems, the tendency quite often, at least at political level, at least in my sphere, is okay, let's move towards more food sovereignty. This means, and there is actually discussion in Switzerland as well, should we increase our food independence and how we should do that, and is it doable, how we can do that. But bearing in mind that, for instance, before the crisis of 2008, if I recall correctly, Saudi Arabia was a net exporter of cereals, and then realizing that there was a huge problem with water, underground water uses, became quite rapidly, actually, net importer of cereal. But let me turn then to Alaa, since you've been working in the science and diplomacy nexus. Speaking about knowing that there are limitations into food sovereignty in terms of producing at home, but is there anything that can be done? I mean, there are countries like, I know Jordan, Tunisia, and others that are actually depending more than 90% on food import. What would be your kind of experience on that?
So with Jordan being one of the countries struggling with water scarcity, but on the other side, there were some good examples from Jordan. For example, using the wastewater management for irrigation. And as we have seen, my colleague had mentioned using the drones. Actually, there was a project in Jordan in collaboration between scientists and the industrial sector to use the drones in the micro-irrigation in Jordan. So those were some good examples that were funded by several organizations. And on the other hand, there's also in the Middle East the Blue Peace Initiative that's working toward facilitating the cooperation of water in the area.
And how does facilitating then I'm coming back to the drones ones and so on, but just a few more elements about facilitating cooperation on water issues. What, in a scientific terms, what is the entry point?
Yeah, it's like this initiative is trying to enable water cooperation in the area between several countries and several parties in that area as well.
Okay, I got some insight on this and these kind of activities, and it starts by collect data and sharing data, right?
Yeah, actually, this is how it started. It started by sharing data from other countries, and it was just like the first thing to have that initiative toward creating that collaboration between countries as well.
So it was used a kind of an early warning also mechanism in case of floods and something that countries that were maybe downstream, they could get alerted rapidly by other countries, independent whether you are countries that usually you work together or not in the diplomatic world. But this is bringing some possible aspects and leading into diplomatic aspects. But first, before going to get there, because there are still few things, because we're talking about creative solutions, like the examples you were saying about the drones. By the way, we just had a few months ago a young investor in Sardinia. Sardinia is an island that we all here we know well because we go all of us on holidays, or many of us on holiday regularly, and we also know that it's an island with having problem with water. And actually, this young one developed a kind of a service through drones that help to a group of farmers reducing the water consumption by 30 to 50%, by not even by touching the production systems, just making the best use of water. Now the point is that we can, of course, we can have a creative solution, but Tamara, when we're having a creative solution, then we need to scale it up. Then time is for finance to come in. So your experience in the region from the bank sector, that you're working in the banking sector, what would be the investment, the proper investment conditions you need in order to make properly your job and scale up these kind of solutions?
Okay, thank you for the question. So yes, as you said, coming from the banking sector, looking at the region, and especially coming from Palestine, where there is a political unrest and economic unrest, it makes it actually a challenge for us to attract more foreign investments. As we all know that foreign investments is so important and it's so needed in the region, especially in Palestine, because the bank alone cannot support the economy and the community. So the banking sector is the backbone of the economy in Palestine, and it tries to do as much as it can that goes beyond of traditional banking. So the bank supports startups, for example, that come up with initiatives and come up with solutions that has solutions to the problems that we face in Palestine. So I think, yeah, having partners and having strategic investors as part of the bank, friends and partners, is so crucial, because the role together is to have a more impact on the region and the community.
Thank you. Now, it's relatively easy said. It's not so easy even to be said, actually, but actually to create the real enabling condition in order to make what you are asking for basically to become true is not a given, is not automatic. And the more we consider something like water or cereal as just as a product that has to take into consideration, yes, the full cost of the production and trading and so on, it gets sometimes difficult to actually do the investment, because the cost is, and the risk perception of this is too high. Maybe I come back to Eugenio rapidly, and I would like to then later on to change a little bit perspective with Derin. So there is one de-risking is about making sure that you are making the best uses of resources, possibly, and then we possibly with accessing to best way to reduce the waste of the resources. And the other one is the de-risking in financial terms. So in you as an analyst, we've seen suddenly inflation coming up, and it's something that if you are in the middle of an investment, or even in an already very highly indebted country that would like to consider food and water as a half public good, this means coming with public investment. What should we do? Is there any way to overcome this problem?
It's a $1 million question. I mean, you have some structural problems in the Middle East in particular, and we've seen that developing also, for example, in many African countries recently. For example, the fact that there are sectors, and the agricultural sector is one of those, that you cannot, or if there are ways, nobody found them, but if you cannot really develop efficiently without the private sector. So you have almost, I'm not talking about big companies, we're talking about also small companies going and developing a field or multiple fields and start producing. And for doing that, they need access to credit, they need access to invest, and it's usually not enough to just having a little share of public investment go in there, because obviously this is open to distortion in the distribution of these resources and so on. And one big problem is the role of banking in the region, the banking sectors all over the region. So in many instances, for example, many banks, their main role is to buy public debt to support public deficits, and and this crowds out obviously money and resources for lending to the private sector. One of the reasons they do so is that fact that, for example, there is no the informality in the private sector is huge, so many times that means that you don't have the bankability to do that. The private companies are just not feasible for loans. And this is something honestly has been also even getting worse in the last years. I think, for example, Egypt that had a good private sector until some years ago, but in the last years there was the public. There was a decision, a strategy, and I don't want to judge that politically, but there was a strategy to crowd out the private sector in favor of the public one, especially the army in the case of Egypt, and that doesn't work good when you need small, medium enterprises developing a sector that's crucial like the agricultural one. Okay. And one last thing is that there is also I think a lack of narrative around it, which can be stupid because it's not financial resources, but it's it can sound weird to talk about narrative, but there is a problem. I know about countries that maybe don't have still a good share of the economy is around the agricultural sector, but young people have been building their expectations around other kind of developments, and they don't want to work in the agricultural sector, and they don't see the point that it's socially demeaning in some way. They don't see, for example, the fact in other countries, Italy included. I know for a fact that there is a huge revamping in the narrative around working in the agricultural sector, and it's something that could be done also in other countries. There's a lot of technology in the.
Okay, just as a warning for all of us is that we are not pretending in 1 hour to find everything, any solution. But yes, it's important, since we're talking about food insecurity, climate change, this means sustainability, is important to at least highlight some of the main points. So we've been talking about the relation between the uses of the resources, the best use of resources in order to take into consideration, including the climate change effects, water, land, and others, by using maybe technology. And this is one entry point for the young ones, for youth, which actually we had some examples. And the other one is in relation to scaling up the issue of investment and finance. We still didn't find a solution yet. We see if during the half an hour remaining we come up with something or not. We will see. The other point that you were mentioning is in the agricultural sectors, how to make it attractive for the younger generations. And this is a discussion that has been going on, and we might touch it again towards the end when we move it a little bit towards, and this will be doing now, from when we talk about food insecurity, access to food, we are not talking just about production. This is the problem that we're always facing. We keep talking about production, where there is a production, and then how we get this product somewhere there. But actually, maybe why not revert a little bit and look into it and getting into the consumption part. So how, because it's always the same, no? To dance tango, you need two or something like this. So you need both the production to be sustainable, but also the consumption to be sustainable. Now, coming back to science. So part of the equation that I've been listening a lot this last couple of years on relation to food insecurity is not just having access or not to food, but it's also the quality of the food, isn't it? So what would be your reflection on that?
So with food being one of the social determinants of health, actually, definitely food insecurity will be affecting health. So just in a short comment, like decreasing the number of meals and affecting the quality of food that people are ingesting. So that's definitely going to affect their health in the total equation.
Thank you, but this implies saying that actually we cannot look at food and or agricultural products as just as a product or food security as a sector. But this implies if you start saying, okay, what is the real true value of food, considering, for instance, health, determinants of health, including social determinants of health. If you're eating well, right? If you are eating healthy food and plenty food and so on, the chances for you being in good health will be higher, right? It's a little bit intuitive, but this implies also that maybe the investment you have to do into the health systems in terms of keep your health afloat, maybe they are reduced in the future. So the values of the food goes also in this direction. This is, I suppose, it's a little bit that you were indicating with the determinants of health.
Definitely, yeah, it's very related. Like it's one of the social determinants of health, and it's very related to what you have been discussing currently.
Yeah, so Derin, right, it's your turn. So this means we are talking about then food systems, actually, not just food sector, because we have to take it the two sides. So let's start a little bit from this point of view, the conversation.
Sure, yes, because I'm an expert mainly on women's rights. I was mainly aiming to talk about transforming the food systems in parallel with gender equality norms. So because this sounds like a really difficult task to achieve, but women have actually really key roles in the economy as income earners, but also as the managers of the food within the house itself. So, but even if they have really key roles, they also face with discriminative practices within their economic participation, which actually hinders their economic participation. And this is actually caused by the patriarchal roles within the families and within the wider societies. And for example, due to the lack of childcare services or options, so many women, and mainly young women, have to just quit their jobs and leave the leave the labor force mainly. So we know that there are some actions needed which will provide us certain mechanisms, which will provide us these mechanisms to form these food systems, which are of course to transform these food systems, which are of course based on the idea of gender equality. And I would like to give you an example, thanks to Pio also informed me about this. Committee on World Food Security. So this committee reports to the United Nations General Assembly, and this is a very inclusive process, actually, inclusive committee, which is kind of a platform for many different stakeholders. And this, they try to ensure food security and nutrition for all. And they also provided certain policy recommendations on promoting youth engagement and employment in agriculture and food systems. They actually did this in July in this year. And their aim was really to reduce the inequalities within the food security system. And their focus was mainly the youth engagement, but they talk a lot about also for the participation of young women and the young girls mainly within these systems. And I will give you certain action examples so that we will have a concrete idea in mind through how can we really form these mechanisms. Firstly, they are talking about creating decent work opportunities for young people and more specifically for young women. And this, of course, requires certain adequate remuneration based on equal pay for equal work, which will help us to eradicate actually the gender pay gap, which is already existing in the agricultural sector also. And secondly, the data collection. So we need to improve the collection of sex and age disaggregated data, so the information based on the labor force participation within the agricultural sector, depending on the people's age and the sexes. And thirdly, and which is actually the one that I want to focus more on and mainly emphasize, is related to partnerships between different actors, institutions operating at different levels. So both at the decision-making process, but also at the implementation phase, of course, of all these policy ideas, let's say, recommendations. This partnership is required to do between states, international organizations, also supranational organizations, women's and youth organizations, private sector, academia, and also, of course, civil society actors. And United Nations Secretary General Guterres, actually, he said that there is more than enough food in the world now, but we need to all act together. And this, what I mean by participation is actually the meaningful and productive participation of all these different actors and organizations and institutions operating firstly at the local level maybe, because we were also talking about the importance of municipalities operating at the local level, but which also transcends to the national and to the global level in the end. So this idea of transnational governance required in this partnership between different actors, institutions operating at different, like various levels. Thank you.
So thank you. So you're talking about governance at the end. At the end, the systems, they function based on what is the accountability of the system, the mechanism, accountability mechanism. We always speak about, tendentially, sorry, but it's not on you, but tendentially we tend to speak generally about governance. Good governance, bad governance, half-half governance. But actually, what does it mean concretely in systems? In systems means having accountability so that it's mechanism in place that makes sure that everybody knows what is happening. And then that you, at least your decision, right or wrong, as you were saying, some of the decisions maybe are taken, that you want to go more with public funds and less with private investment, but that this at least has to be a clear decision that has been taken with our rationale, right? Now, how can we bring rationality, if you want, in a very difficult time and moment like this one, that we are having a war just there. You have heard the other panels. We have been having a lot of this discussion around this and what is affecting, how it is affecting also the region and so on. And I'm coming back to you. So how could you, for instance, organize that in diplomatic circle, you can organize this acceptance or this working on this accountability mechanism in order to make them stronger?
So you have been asking questions. Now I'm going to make a statement and ask you a question.
Yes, you're totally right.
So in the last few days, actually, in the summit, we have learned that Switzerland has been elected on the UN Security Council, where decisions are being made and policies are being created. So how do you see the involvement of scientists in the decision-making and creating of policies, using the scientific evidence in creating policies, especially in the field of climate change and food insecurity?
I will give you a very pragmatic and concrete answer, but then I will ask you again, what do you mean with this question towards Switzerland? So they know that let's be clear, what is the task that you're giving me? I mean, of course, I'm forcing tasks to you. We had a discussion prior coming here, so who's going to talk about what? Because everyone could talk about everything, basically, but we kind of define a little bit the roles according to actually what we are doing in our life. And actually you got me, because this is part of my task as a head of a mission to the United Nations in Rome, focusing on food security and system. This is one point that maybe this will have is conducive. So very concretely, practically speaking, so you cannot just get to the Security Council and say, hey guys, I want to talk about this subject, unless this subject is related directly to conflicts. And even there, not always. But let's say Security Council is part of the UN that is dealing with peace, or let's say controlling wars, deciding possibly together about where we have to use force in order to enable or to impose a conditional situation, right? Right or wrong, and so on. You know the way it works and the decision-making process, I don't need to say something. But there is a window. This window is, it's called ARIA meetings, in which you can organize meetings in the Security Council on specific subject that are related, of course, with peace and security, but they are not just peace and security. Like, for instance, for example, Senegal, I think it was in 2017, maybe, organized an area discussion on transboundary water management, something that actually some of the major countries in this world would not like to see that discussing in Security Council, because water is considered a strategic resource, right? That has to be dealt nationally. But you know, with 158 river basins, transboundary river basins are around the world. I don't know how many transboundary aquifers around the world. It's hard to say that it's just a matter of my interest. And you know better than me, in the region there are several cases on rivers and so on that has leading to dispute. So, but the discussion as an area discussion organized by Senegal was based on facts, scientific facts. So one possibility would be bringing actually an area discussion at the Security Council.
Yeah, bringing scientists on the table. So that would be like implying that also there's responsibility on the scientists to work more on their communication skills, like to provide better communication for the research results, to communicate better with the diplomats, and also for the diplomats to create an area or a space for them in the policy-making tables.
Yes, and you're right. And as far as concerning Switzerland, because you know, then there is also a series of foreseen possible activities that has to be treated at the Security Council. But Security Council is one of example, but then I would maybe touch another one. And maybe I will ask also Eugenio to help me on that one. But in the Security Council, you know that there are monthly heads. So you change regularly one of the, let's say, the leader in the Security Council that is usually bringing in a subject or another, right? And there we have been actually discussing, actually it was yesterday, we were discussing in Bern what could be in relation to climate change, what could be the way to touch climate change related issues, and we were talking about food security and water, but how can you actually get acceptance to, because the members need to accept. And you know, you have P5, you have 5 that can put a veto, even to, we don't want to discuss this in the Security Council. And I would say there are two maybe ways in order to make sure that you can get some evidence into the discussion at political level, in this specific case at the Security Council, is maybe go regional. If we would have a discussion on the region, for instance, in the MENA region and a Mediterranean and Middle East region, it might get more acceptance than just say, let's talk about food insecurity and climate change all over the world. This is one. And then you still need it to link with a subject that is pertinent to the work of the Security Council. For instance, protection of civilians in case of conflicts, disasters, and so on, because this is a subject that is to be treated, including by the Security Council, not only. So we are thinking on these terms. But Eugenio, if you heard for sure that Gutierrez, and this was not in the script, but that you heard that we had the Gutierrez that realizing that the food insecurity is not just a food issue. He called for a global crisis response group that is basically dealing with the nexus energy, climate change, and food. I would say climate change, we can say land, water, and so on. And this basically calls a coordination among the United Nations agencies. And this is what also both Tamara and Derin, you mentioned the need for getting partnerships that are meaningful. How would you see a mechanism like this one, or how should be working a mechanism like this in a way that you don't have just WFP keeping with their work on, by the way, we Switzerland were trying to push WFP in entering more in the social protection towards, I don't know, FAO with a normative role and so on, how you would see that. We tried, by the way, with the Food System Summit in 21, again called by Gutierrez, but since it was not a negotiated outcome there, the result was, at least the legitimacy of the result was felt as being mixed, right? I see you nodding, so you know that. Eugenio, if you can say something like this, and then I will ask, I still how many minutes? Till 3 or 3:10? Oh, no answer, so we just go. 3. Go ahead.
Well, I think it was, first of all, a good step ahead, the fact that you start seeing the issue in a holistic way. So you have food security, but you have the climate change that involves food security, but the two are not perfectly overlapping. They have their own also issues attached. I think overall that it is a bit probably a bit naive to think that there is one forum that we can solve everything, because this stuff has so many ramifications that need to be addressing in different ways. For example, something that has a lot to do with what I do, which is economic risk, and it's something that I think there have been some good positive steps ahead in the last weeks. Is the fact that the G20, that is another forum, it's not strictly the United Nations, but it's another multilateral forum that has been doing something interesting in the last years, has been working on this new framework to treat financial crisis. And financial crises are now one of the big engines behind some food crises we have been having in the last 2 years. The last one, macroscopic, was Sri Lanka. Now we have 6 million. Sri Lanka was a middle-income country. Now it has 6 million food insecure. So it has to remind us that no position is sure forever. And they have been realizing, I think Sri Lanka was really a good, good alert, the fact that a lot of countries are going through this problem, and there are this framework of treating multilaterally financial crisis, because as you probably know, it's not the case anymore like the 90s where poor countries are indebted to Western countries. It's not the case like that anymore. Now there's the indebtedness is a lot more diversified. Actually, China plays a huge role, especially in African countries. Private sector finance plays a huge role in a lot of countries. And that is a good starting point to have a new multilateral system to address a major issue. And I think that we need to start with that, with a big issue, but that is not it's not solving the entire picture. But to jump from that, to build a collaboration on that and trust on that, to go on other files. I mean, the problem is that now multilateralism is. I think the good thing about this framework from the G20 is that it has, especially it's co-chaired, especially the one on Ethiopia, and the discussion on Ethiopia and Zambia are co-chaired by France and China. So you have a Western country and China, and you build some trust on that, some communication on that, and you can open other bridges for other issues.
Okay, thank you. So basically, to translate this in oversimplifying terms is to maybe make sure that you have a platform and related to finance that is helping de-risking mechanism, if it's necessary, an early intervention in even to to react in case of debt. This implies having other actors, not only Bretton Woods institutions, but also other actors like World Bank, IMF, and so on, to work. And maybe you are indirectly suggesting doing it on a regional basis so that you can have multilateral actors, but focusing, for instance, in one region. This could be an idea. We are not pretending to solve anything, but this could be an idea then that helps Tamara in creating the enabling environment in order to make actual investment in scaling up the activities, right? That's more or less. Okay. Derin, I want to come back rapidly before wrapping up and then asking maybe also to you a last point in, you were mentioning municipalities at a certain moment as a way to go into, getting towards a kind of a more sustainable food systems. Can you maybe elaborate a bit?
Sure. It's about the importance of the activities within the led by the municipalities, let's say, at the municipality level. Actually, during our summit this week, we also talked about this think local, act global. So when we start doing things like initiating these activities or like changing minds at the local level, I think this can become something that might get bigger and bigger and have a larger and larger effect, I would say. So, I think like starting with the local and going to the global, as I said, like maybe also, as you said, the regional capacities, like improving the regional capacities and activities would be an important also a step to improve all these systems, food systems mainly. But yes, starting at the local and going to the global would be my, let's say, humble suggestion.
Thank you. What I would also add there, why municipalities, one element of the importance of municipalities, but there is also intrinsically a difficulty related to that, is that, of course, you know the population dynamics, right? Increase of population and a lot of migration towards towns, right? So municipalities are under huge pressure, and they just have to deliver. This is the positive part of municipalities, because they have to deliver daily water, electricity, make sure that there is connectivity between also the access to food and so on and so on. Therefore, they tendentially are more pragmatic and less politicizing, I don't know if I should use this term, than discussions at national level. The other side of the coin is that, at least for what concerning Africa, I'm not sure about all the Middle East, but definitely for the Mediterranean and North African region, is that the delegation of authorities to municipality from treasury, for instance, is almost nil. So there is a discussion that maybe needs to also be taken on board. So there are now more and more municipalities that are interlinked in platforms, regional and international. But actually was in Morocco, then in the relation to the migration compact, there were mayors of 500 cities. There were the municipalities. They're having a same position and direction towards addressing in the most positive manner possible the issue of migration into towns. But there are, of course, issues to be looked at in terms of accessing to the liquidity necessary for doing the investment, also in the municipality. A question, and then I would end. I'm sorry, I wanted to open up for the floor, but I was hoping they were giving me the 10 minutes they told me at the beginning at 2, but they didn't. So I think we'll have to go it in this way. Are you asking Switzerland to go with this subject at the Security Council?
Yeah,
as a young change maker?
Yeah, definitely. My point was since you're having now the action on the Security Council, maybe it will be a good chance to work on policies in regard of food insecurity and climate change, and also, as I mentioned before, involve the scientists in that.
Okay, I will. I can promise. I cannot promise a decision, of course, because it's not on me. But I promise I will definitely pass the messages to both the the head of the missions in New York, that she asked us yesterday to please support her with facts, with activities that are brought in and new ideas brought in by young ones. Actually, yes, I'm not joking, huh? This was what she was asking yesterday. Of course, she's not the one taking the decision, but of course she is also influential. And so I will bring in these elements into the discussion and at the highest possible level in Swiss government to see whether we can join forces in this activity. Now, if you allow me just 2 minutes propaganda. I have to. I have to, no, I don't have to, but I want to, which is different. The first, and this is also where I'm asking my colleague to put some few text over there. Something we discussed a bit during the seminar, but I think it's the moment also to bring it a little bit here at the forum. Was a group of young ones a couple of years ago. They were supporting, with the idea to support Switzerland in the negotiations related to the Food System Summit, a group very heterogeneous, people working in the public sector, private sector, working in agriculture, in food production, but also architects, city planners, and so on. It started between Switzerland, Italy, and MENA region, thanks to Federica. Where is she? There. She gave the methodology to the group, and she came actually, and she gave the methodology to the group that the group developed a manifesto. This manifesto, the bites of transformation, so it's not pretentious, it's just a bite of a transformation of food system. But actually, the positive aspect of this small, short manifesto, 2.5 pages, is that it's bringing a vision of a society of the future through the lenses of food system transformation that is unifying and not dividing, which is for me has a huge value, because we actually then, and this is the second point, as being in charge to facilitate negotiations on policy recommendations on youth engagement in agriculture and food systems, actually I use this work as a basis, right, to create the enabling environment for negotiations. Because these days, I can tell you, at the UN and in the Committee of Food Security is no exception, it's so difficult to find a consensus. And in 3 weeks of negotiations, we did find a consensus, and this consensus is in the policy recommendations that you can find there, that actually are a little bit a response at this level of what you're looking for. Now the point is that, okay, since these recommendations were based already on practical experiences of different countries, like for instance, Cabo Verde is the most advanced in digitalizing the governance of and accountability of the use of land and water in the world, is maybe one of the most advanced. They were giving us the elements that we could then bring in as a policy recommendation, and so on. Now the point is that how from there, we take it from there into going to regional and national level in order to change the systems, food systems, because food systems are not. Food is not just a commodity. Food is intrinsically linked to our culture, our being, our traditions. Traditions that needs to be renewed, but is difficult because we don't want. It's about who we are, about sense of belonging that goes with food. And there are ways to change it, to make food systems more resilient without necessarily having to feel that actually I had to take away an arm or a leg of my tradition. And is of course also related to narratives. We started with the narratives and we finished with the narratives. Thank you for allowing me 1 minute more than was supposed to. And thank you for participating, Alyssa. And thank you to all of you.